Yeah. Welcome, everybody, to the vice presidential debate coverage night. I am joined by the incredible, the wonderful Josiah from the Pondering Politics channel. Josiah, we had last time we were doing this, it was the presidential debate, and we had quite the night. It was fantastic. We can only hope it'll go that well. How are you feeling tonight, Josiah?
So, if you recall, when we went into the presidential debate, you actually were more concerned than I was, which is rare. I'm usually the cynic, you're the optimist, and we switched it up there. And yeah, with this situation, I got to say, I'm not as confident as I was about the presidential debate, if only for the fact that J.D. Vance, for all his faults, is not a complete moron the way that Donald Trump is. However, as I told you, privately a few days ago, I still believe that Governor Walz will walk away with the trophy, so to speak, in this debate because he is smart, like J.D. Vance, but he also has other attributes Vance doesn't. He's likable, for one. He's likable. He also has the facts on his side, and I think those two things will ultimately carry the day.
A big question mark to me is, will JD Vance have successfully practiced being a normal person who can sympathize? That's a difficult thing to fake, which is why JD Vance has had one sort of tough moment after another that has gone viral. Whereas Tim Walz, since he became the pick, I think even if you're MAGA, you can acknowledge, has had a better track record. The polls show this too, with relating to people, coming off likable. And so on the debate stage, will that contrast be laid bare? Will it be more clear than ever? Or is it going to be a chance for JD Vance to trick people, to fake his way into being normal, Josiah?
Reportedly, JD Vance has visited multiple donut shops in the days before the debate, preparing for human interaction. He's read books about it.
How long
He
have
has
you
been
worked here?
tutored.
How long have you
Yeah.
worked here? How long have you
And
worked
then
here?
and then what was super strange about all that wasn't even the questions. Like, listen, I understand you're inquisitive, whatever. I ask questions like that, but his response was just okay. Like
Okay.
no continuation, like, oh, that's interesting. Like, oh, do you like it here? It's just like, so what's your name? Tim. Okay.
Good.
Can I get
Good.
some of those sprinkled confections, those multicolored confections that one puts on a donut? You mean sprinkles, sir?
Good.
Yeah, those sprinkles thing. Yes, it's just
Well, I love
right.
to. You're right that nothing's wrong with asking questions. What's wrong is asking only one question 4 times to everyone. How long have you worked here? How long have you worked here? How long has this building been here? Come on, be more creative than that. I will say that that clip that Josiah and I are referring to, it I do think embodies JD Vance's struggles, of course. But also, we saw this too. Now I'm blanking on what the place was, but when JD Vance wasn't allowed to go into the restaurant initially, he clearly has a really bad advance team, because what you're supposed to do is call ahead, see if the restaurant will be excited about a visit, and then have everything set up so then the candidate walks in and it's just beautiful, it's flawless. But it seems like they just sort of have JD Vance walk up there with no advance notice and go, "Hi, I'm JD. Let's see how this goes."
And then you just see the door just slowly shut in his face. Yeah, exactly. I think it was it was that Pennsylvania bagel shop or something like that. It was that chain in Pennsylvania, and they actually welcomed the vice president's team and Governor Walz as well, just to like the juxtaposition. Yeah, exactly. You're supposed to go do this prep work in advance. And also, he got burned during that donut shop viral moment because there was at least one worker there who said that she didn't want to be on camera, and which is totally understandable. But to go ahead and do that in advance, because now you've made everybody uncomfortable, So
and then
we just
Then JD Vance is just asking a blurred out face how long they've worked at a donut shop. It just makes it all the more strange. But we've gone too long on a clip that we haven't prepared to play for you. So let's get into one that I do have. I want to get Josiah's reaction to this, just as we await the vice presidential debate. With a little bit of time before it, I have a few things prepared to go through with Josiah, starting with Trump and his new favorite theory about what goes on at school.
Can you imagine that your child leaves for school and comes home and their gender has been changed? I don't want to get into the details, but it's not even believable.
It's not believable. Do you know why, Josiah?
Because it's not true. That's a really good reason for a thing to not be believable, Luke.
Yeah, it literally is unbelievable. Here is Governor Tim Walz arriving at the debate venue. And this just seems like some background noise, so I will narrate over it. There's a person walking downstairs. That person is Tim Walz waving. And it's interesting, the sort of mannerisms of Tim Walz really irritates MAGA for some reason. And I don't think they realize when they attack him for smiling too much, or he'll walk out to a crowd and be going sort of enthusiastically, and they'll play clips going, "Well, that's weird, that's strange." I don't think they realize they're making an argument against something people actually like about Tim Walz, which is his relatability, the fact that he's not a perfect, clean-cut politician who has everything practiced, but is interacting with thousands of people screaming for him in a way that a normal person would, which is, oh my gosh, me? Oh my gosh.
Right, there's a jubilance, there's a joy to Tim Walz, the way that you don't see from a lot of politicians, because that they're so reserved, they're so stoic. I remember in 2004, Democratic presidential candidate Howard Dean made the mistake of expressing joy, and his voice cracked because he reached like a soprano note, and he was, and then that was the end of his political career. And what was so interesting was because that was a moment, it was awkward to be sure, but it was a moment of genuine humanity, right? And Howard Dean was punished for it. But Governor Walz has just serious dad energy. He's everybody's favorite dad and kind of embodies that trope. Whereas it seems like many MAGA Republican politicians, based on how they react to Governor Walz, they kind of betray their own insecurity, their own fragility, dare I say, a toxic masculinity. Like, who hugs their kids? Who expresses, exactly. And it's like, I understand you have obviously some issues that you're trying to work through, but you're projecting onto others, and it's not working. The polls reflect that. JD Vance's favorability rating continues to drop. Governor Walz's favorability continues to climb. There's a deficit between these two men that I don't think this debate will address.
Let me see if Trump campaign official Corey Lewandowski and it looks like we're experiencing a little bit of trouble on the Zoom. I'll hopefully Hopefully everything's okay. Is everything okay, Jaden? Yeah, all good. Everything's okay. Let's do this clip here of Corey Lewandowski.
On all of this chaos and disorder hitting tonight's vice presidential debate, he's going to give us the update on what's going on. Also, Fox Business will bring you that debate at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Corey Lewandowski's got a lot to say tonight.
Josiah, did you see that? Could you see that?
Yeah, I could.
Why did he keep that face for so long? I don't know. You don't need to respond to that. Here is more of Fox News. Kellyanne Conway begging Trump, do another debate, please.
Me, he said, quote, I think I'll park him in Pennsylvania. And now Trump is actually winning Pennsylvania. Kamala's going to struggle with the union households, the Catholic households, anybody who touches and concerns fracking and cares about anybody who's in the energy industry. I asked President Trump today, I interviewed for an hour. I said to him, the guy I know, you, is not going to be able to sit still after a 90-minute VP debate and let that be the last word in presidential debates. You're going to say, well, when's our next one? And I hope he does that.
What do you think? Do you think there's going to be another debate with Harris?
He had said no, but he didn't say totally no. That October 23rd one was CNN's too late. But why not get back in there? Trump's like, I told him, you're like Shohei Ohtani. You're pitching, you're batting. You've done 7 of them. She's 1 for 1. Big deal. But look, the other thing he told me today is he doesn't feel safe.
He's Ohtani, and JD's shagging flies. A lot of great baseball analogies. Dana Perino's watching, has no idea what you just said.
It's called striking out, Tim Walz.
Thank you so much. Kellyanne Conway, check out her Fox Nation. All right. What the Democrats...
So I am curious if... Josiah, can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. Sorry, we're just... as happens every time dealing with those technical difficulties, but I do want to
tell
get
your
your
team,
take.
Luke, that everything is good on my end. I can hear you. I can hear the clip. I can see the clip. So
Okay,
we're all
good to hear.
on
And of
my
course,
end.
audience, we're always having someone check the comments to make sure y'all are saying everything sounds and looks good on your end. But there, I've heard some speculate that watching this debate and it being sort of the final word in terms of debate will prompt Trump to last minute accept the offer of a CNN late October debate with Vice President Harris. What do you think the likelihood is of that?
So I don't know. I mean, it's hard to predict some of Trump's behaviors. And I got out of the prophecy business after 2016 when he won his first presidential race because I expected Secretary Clinton to win. I could see it either way. I will say, I watched that Kellyanne interview that he had with her, and he does this thing that he always does, which is like, I love debates. I want like 3 or 4 debates. It's just too late. And also it's rigged. And he comes up with like a particular excuse, neither of which fly, because he openly and publicly and persistently praised CNN after the first debate against President Biden. And then he said, well, because they did a fair debate the first time, they have to make up for it by rigging the debate against me if I were to go back. But he's also shot down offers by Fox News for them to host a debate. As a matter of fact, Brett Baer, a conservative Fox News host who grades Trump on a curve. He's not one of the most deranged at Fox, but he's still, Trump sympathizer. He told Hugh Hewitt, who is a deranged Trump sympathizer on Hugh Hewitt's show, that it's not Vice President Harris who's the holdup. It is Donald Trump. He thinks that Vice President Harris would sooner accept a Fox-moderated debate than Donald Trump. And I should say, which I don't know where you stand on this, I think that the vice president would be well within her rights if she chose to decline a Fox-moderated debate, given that they had to pay $800 million to settle the Dominion voting systems lawsuit. They had to pay nearly $1 billion signal boosting Donald Trump's lies. If the vice president chooses not to debate on Fox, that's a perfectly valid reason to do so. But even despite all of that, Luke, Fox believes she would sooner accept a Fox-moderated debate than Trump himself. And I should also say he has apparently dropped out of the 60 Minutes interview. That was reported a couple of hours ago. So, yeah, seems like he's pretty traumatized.
I saw that too. Watching Trump, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Watching Trump attempt, I don't have a good analogy, so I'm just not going to go to one, but it is quite the experience to listen and really try to apply normal adult logic to the explanation Trump will provide when he gets confronted over not debating. Because he can't go, I'm scared. I'm a scared little boy. I'm scared. So instead, he has to say, well, I want to debate again, but it's too late. But also CNN would be rigged. But also I would still do it on CNN because I would do it anywhere. And also the last one was rigged, but the last one was my best one yet. But it was rigged, and it was terrible. But it was great, but it was rigged, but it was terrible.
And Luke, I was going to say one that we tend to forget, even on the late thing. It's important to remember that in 2020, when he debated President Biden, that date was October 22nd. The proposed CNN debate this year is October 23rd. Really, a 24-hour period goes from perfectly acceptable to tardy? Really? Doesn't make sense.
It does not. Now, as we get closer and closer to the big face-off between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, one of the questions is, where do things stand now in terms of the popularity, the impact of the candidates on their respective tickets? And Harry Enten did some interesting reporting on CNN that I want to play for you.
So tonight is the night for Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, their first and only vice presidential debate, and potentially the final debate of the entire 2024 cycle. We shall see on that last bit. But regardless, for tonight, who has more to gain or lose as they get onto the debate stage? The numbers have been crunched by Harry Enten, and he is here.
Crunching.
Let the crunching occur. Let's start with kind of where they stand as they walk on the debate stage tonight. Where do they stand with voters?
Yeah, let's take a look. And I think you can see here, oy vey when it comes to J.D. Vance. Oy vey, this is the net favorable ratings. Look at that, minus 11 points for J.D. Vance. No bueno. Let's jump to the other side of the screen. Tim Walz, look at that. A +4 net favorability rating, the highest of any of these four folks on the screen right now. The Democrats better liked than the Republicans, but Walz slightly better liked than Kamala Harris. J.D. Vance has actually, if anything, been a drag on the Republican side of the ticket, while Tim Walz has actually, if anything, helped Kamala Harris up a little bit. But the bottom line is here, this is a negative 11 points, no good. This +4 points, pretty good in today's polarized environment.
Well, okay, so polarized environment is the thing I want to hit on here. One, J.D. Vance is giving you the stink eye over your shoulder for your assessment here.
Ugh.
Two, in terms of historical perspective, where does that favorability rating stand?
Again, not good. This is something I've been harping on throughout this entire cycle. So this is VP nominees with a net negative favorable rating going into their first vice presidential debate. J.D. Vance here at minus 11 points, the worst all time going into their first VP debate. The only other person in negative net favorability territory is Dan Quayle back in 1988 with a minus 3-point net favorability rating. If you know anything.
Josiah, there was all of this controversy about the dossier, the Vance dossier. And somehow in the Trump campaign's investigating, and then this report was leaked. It honestly, there wasn't much in it that was super bombshell, but I am so fascinated that if they took the time to investigate the person they were considering picking as Trump's vice presidential running mate, how did they not find out just how unpopular he is? You think, I guess because we watch these political shows, you think that people are thinking more, that our political leaders are putting more thought into these monumental decisions, that they've worked out 1,500 focus groups that grade J.D. Vance versus Kristi Noem after the dog story versus Tim Scott, and they would pick the better option. They picked the worst option. I think cricket killer Kristi Noem, Cricket's the name of her dog, would have been better polling-wise than this.
Damn, I honestly wasn't prepared for that. Hadn't considered it. It's really, really tough. I think that what this shows is that let's dial it back a little bit. So when 2024 has been overall, I think, the most disciplined Trump campaign, to kind of put that in perspective. But here, since President Biden, oh, really? Well, we'll get into that. Okay. I think that the most disciplined Trump campaign until President Biden dropped out. And then Donald Trump was just totally thrown for a loop. And then he has been giving in to his worst impulses, his id. And that's part of the reason why he summoned back Corey Lewandowski, because Corey Lewandowski, in addition to being, just kind of a loser and somebody against whom there have been credible allegations of misconduct, his campaign advice in 2016 when he was a top Trump advisor was let Trump be Trump. So Trump is, prior to Lewandowski coming back on board, Trump was surrounded by people like Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles, people who are like, hey, don't be you. Be somebody else and let us run the disciplined campaign. And as a consequence, I think arguably Donald Trump gained more ground than, quite frankly, he deserved. But as soon as he gives into his worst impulses, things start to fall apart. I think J.D. Vance is kind of an example of this, where J.D. Vance was not a strategic pick. J.D. Vance wasn't like Mike Pence in the sense that Mike Pence, brought the evangelical base into the Republican fold at a time when many evangelicals rightly had an issue with Donald Trump, given his, shall we say, I was going to say character flaws. I was just going to say personality, just who he is as a person. And so Pence was a way to align the evangelicals with the Trump campaign. Who the hell does J.D. Vance bring? Who does J.D. Vance bring that Trump really didn't already have? He's just more of the same. And so to me, that's how this happened. It's Trump thinking, I don't need anybody. I mean, you've heard him say it, Luke. I've got all the votes in the world. I don't need votes. Don't worry about voting. Just worry about watching the people who vote for the opposition. I think this is just a reflection of Donald Trump not thinking strategically, because I think at the time he picked Vance, he thought that he was just going to moonwalk his way back into the White House.
I think you have to remember to understand the decision, the context. It was post-assassination attempt in Butler, and as horrific as that was, he saw a huge political boost, and his polls were going up. It was post the disastrous debate, and it was a lot of people saying, this is Trump's going to win. And so, to your point, Trump in his world really wanted to pick someone who wouldn't take away the spotlight, who wouldn't question him, etc. And J.D. Vance, apparently under the advisement of his son, Trump ended up being convinced that J.D. Vance was the person. And that could not have been a worse decision, because right after he picked him, everything changed. And J.D. Vance, like you said, is not picking up new votes. I was going to say, on the discipline campaign, I see what you mean. There was and all of this is within our understanding of a very undisciplined Donald Trump. But the way the campaign was being run pre-Kamala Harris being the top of the ticket, I agree, was way more disciplined than post-Kamala Harris. But sometimes I look back at his 2016 campaign, and while I'm disgusted that he won, I'm outraged that he won then, there are elements of the con he was delivering that my political analyst brain can understand. Okay, I see how that tricked some people, because he had this sort of, more than he has now, I'm protecting your jobs in this way and that way, and I'm an outsider going to do this. And he was a little bit better at speaking on some of the issues that people care about. And then he had his normal rage baiting, getting his base fired up. But for the key people who decide the election, he had some things to appeal to them. Whereas now he has some, of course, because he'll say things that are inaccurate but appeal to some people on the economy and the border. But it seems like he's never gotten back to what resonated, unfortunately, with people in 2016.
I should say, I think that you're making the case that Trump was a better candidate in 2016. I totally agree with you. Harris becoming the nominee, post-Harris becoming the nominee, it doesn't matter. Donald Trump in 2016 as a person, as a candidate, was much more formidable for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was nowhere near as diminished mentally and physically as he is now. Number two, he was effectively a blank slate in the sense that he hadn't been president for 4 years. He hadn't lost a re-election bid. And he had that disruptor reputation coming in, this third-party wrecking ball. Totally agree with you. What I meant was the campaign itself, like the apparatus around Trump, in my opinion, is more sophisticated and disciplined now. Trump himself, like, if basically, let me put it like this: as scary as this is, imagine this. Imagine you had 2016 Trump today with the campaign that he had pre-Harris.
I see.
You know what I'm saying? Like, imagine that. I mean, my God, he might be polling 10 points ahead. That's a scary thought, because in my opinion, 2016, 2020, 2024 Trump is unqualified to be president of the United States. I just mean the campaign around him.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing it disintegrate in real time because, reportedly he is shunting aside the advice of Chris LaCivita and others like it to listen to the likes of Corey Lewandowski, who's just like, hey, just be you. Just do whatever the hell you want. And that is disastrous advice for Donald Trump.
Yeah. And then a big thing I think plays into why he doesn't have the and just so any of you know, I know these sorts of live streams bring a lot of people who've never seen maybe even either Josiah or myself know that with everything we're saying, Trump could still win. That's the terrifying part. He could run a terrible campaign. He's a terrible candidate, and he could still win, which is why it's so important that we engage. But he clearly doesn't have the momentum, the energy, and the resonance with his core audience even that he used to. And I think that plays out in some of the rallies he's having lately. Aaron Rupar clipped the clip that we're about to watch. Just note how low energy Trump is, because I hate using this, it sounds like such a positive term, but his superpower was being entertaining enough that everyone had to focus on him, which meant enough people would buy his BS. But if he can't be entertaining enough to keep even Fox News covering him as they keep cutting away, or other right-wing networks, then he can't drive the narrative as much. And you see why when you watch some of these events where he's so boring.
Did an amazing job. Operation Warp Speed is being studied by many, many schools, both militarily and business-wise. Operation Warp Speed, even my greatest enemies, they say, what a job that was. That was a job like nobody else has ever done. And it's ripped the world apart. Every country got ripped apart, including China. China was delayed, but it was hit harder proportionally probably than almost any country. It was a terrible time. Probably $60 trillion in damage, and caused by the Wuhan lab. I said that from the beginning. It came out of Wuhan.
So you get the point. He's just very, very sleepy. And I'm sure you have, but what has your take been on if you've been noticing how you don't have the explosive entertainer that created a situation where the ratings caused outlets to give Trump this crazy free platform? Now he's going to get the big platform because he's the candidate and he's now established, but there's not the ability to grab the cameras like he could before because he's diminished.
No, he's incredibly diminished. I mean, right now, he's, to the extent that he can generate a platform, it is because he's the former president of the United States. And of course, he's the Republican nominee, but it's all these things into one. And he still says things that are at least as incendiary and deranged as he did in 2016. But you're right, the delivery is not what it used to be. I mean, we've talked about this on our channels multiple times in separate videos. You know, Fox repeatedly will constantly cut away from Trump in a way that they never would have in 2020. And even in 2016, once he became the Republican nominee. I think there is a tacit understanding that Donald Trump is not the Donald Trump of 2016, for better or worse. And it goes back to kind of what you said at the beginning, which is it's sad. It's really sad. And we can say this because, and certainly I can say this because we're not running for office, but this is something that future generations are going to look back on. I genuinely believe on our generation and the Trump era generation. Like you guys put him in the White House. You let him get that close to the White House in 2 other elections. God willing, he loses this one, because even with the various institutional advantages of the Republican Party, you know, let me put it like this. When I interviewed Mehdi Hassan, you know, who was a British citizen and an American citizen, he's talked about this before. He's like, you know, the Tory party in the United Kingdom, he disagrees with them on policy, and he thinks that they have some genuinely despicable people in their ranks. But he's like, the conservatives of every other Western democracy and the Commonwealth countries, including Canada and Australia, he's like, they live in reality, and they're not nearly as fascistic and cultish as the MAGA Republican Party we see before us now. I think this will be studied decades from now as a phenomenon the likes of which we have never seen. But just goes to show that, yeah, Donald Trump can still, even in his diminished state, he can still win this election. Absolutely. Still within the margin of error. And that's why the vice president keeps saying that we're the underdogs, because I think that's a posture we need to continue to have, even when we're in the lead.
Right. I know I struggle with articulating the thought that I'm about to, but as someone who really is patriotic myself, I really do see, unlike MAGA now, what's great about the United States, what's special, what's unique, what is to be loved, as well as it being my home and loving it because it's my home. And I will feel that way even if Trump wins. Unlike MAGA, I'm not going to say instantly I hate everything because someone I disagree with is in power. But it is tough to grapple with what I will have to come to terms with about my own country, the one that I do love, and want to dedicate my life to working to make better. You have to come to terms with some really frightening truths, even if Trump loses, just because of how close he got to winning, about us. And I know we like to say, no, but it's them, it's other people. I know, but a part of us being one country is we're one people, and a chunk of our people, us, wants this guy. And that is a really hard thing emotionally to process. And God forbid he becomes president again. That most powerful country on the planet that wields all this power, and there's so much at stake because of that. And so us having high standards in our governance matters that much more than any other country. To put him, it really would, beyond the fear for people that I love and just the bad governance and the bad economic proposals and whatever, the identity of the United States for another term being associated with this freaks me out, Josiah.
No, it really should. I mean, again, it's one of those things where I keep going back to that Trump is probably the closest thing to a political villain that I've seen, in American politics. And I'm a big pop culture buff. But the thing is that, a good villain in all these fictional stories, they have a sophistication and an intelligence about them, a cunning. And the thing about Donald Trump is he just really is a buffoon. Like it's stunning where he's not the Machiavellian mastermind that we see in all these political dramas and, big epic fantasy movies and stuff like that. He's just this, malignantly narcissistic, pathologically lying doofus who has been aided and abetted by a bunch of bad faith actors. I mean, really, it's also fascinating to consider the implications of the Republican Party because, and this goes back to our predictions for this debate. The reason that we're both confident that Governor Walz will do well, but we're not as confident and we're not as gleeful as we were with the Harris-Trump debate is because J.D. Vance is smart. J.D. Vance might play stupid, right? But he's actually pretty smart, as is Mitch McConnell and John Thune. Ted Cruz, Harvard graduate, litigated multiple times in front of the United States Supreme Court. Al Franken, former Democratic senator, talks about this too. Ted Cruz is a really smart guy, and he's really clever. He just sometimes can do an impression of a moron because
John Kennedy.
John Kennedy, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. You want to talk about a guy who has manufactured this entire persona. I mean, even the accent. He has deliberately increased his accent over the years compared to when he first started out in the Senate. And that's where I'm really curious to see what happens. If Trump loses, which he could win, but I do believe he will lose. I really believe that. What will happen of the Republican Party? Because I'm not convinced that they're going to have an epiphany. I'm not convinced that they're going to break up with him. I'm not convinced that they're going to be like, you know what, Donald? We tried to make it work, Don. I gotta move on. I gotta find my own way. I don't think it's going to happen because they haven't done it yet, and they've had ample reason to do so.
I think that everything you said absolutely correct. Don't even get me started on John Kennedy. But again, Republican Senator John Kennedy, that could be confusing. But I think I believe Trump when he says he's not going to run again in 2028. I think he's tired. He wants to go on a golf course. I do believe, though, unfortunately, and I don't like wishing this into existence, but a lot of people say, what comes next? If Kamala Harris wins, hooray, but what comes next? Well, a big part of the discussion is going to be pushing the Democratic Party to really get stuff done, if that happens, okay? But then as it pertains to the Republican Party, so then are we going to go back to the party of John McCain? And if I know anything, and I haven't been in this biz the longest, but from the time that I have been, it's not going to go back to the party of John McCain. I am almost certain we're going to have a party of March of the Green far sooner than John McCain. And we're going to have Trump, and this is going to be bad for the Republican Party politically, but weighing in for years to come. And it'll be sort of the senatorial candidates for the midterms travel down to Mar-a-Lago and try to get Trump's endorsement. And the party's still defined by that. And then it's going to be a battle for who's the next him, who's going to be the next top person. But it'll all be defined under the umbrella of a MAGA GOP, which, if you're just thinking about Democratic politics, is probably better electorally for Democrats, but is much more disastrous for our country, which is why I wish, even if this meant more elections could be won by Republicans, it would go back to the party of John McCain. But unless we see a big party realignment, what happened, and a big chunk of the electorate just disappearing again from voting, what happens to all these people who now believe Trump's the second coming of Jesus? They don't just go, okay, now let's support Nikki Haley.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's become a cult. And if you talk to any social psychologist or any sociologist, they'll tell you that it's really hard to de-radicalize cults. I would be stunned if, let's say Trump loses, and let's say Trump retires from politics, and let's say not only from politics in the sense that he refuses to be the candidate, but also says, you know what? I am done with politics. Basically, he pulls a President Bush and, it has nothing to do with Republican Party machinations. He doesn't try to be the power behind the throne. He truly goes away. I'm not convinced that I'd be stunned if the MAGA Republican Party left in his wake, becomes a neocon loyal opposition party again, right? Because you would have to believe that their viciousness and their contempt for the neocons, who they see as insufficiently loyal to not only them, but also to Trump, right? They hate Nikki Haley. They hate Liz Cheney. They hate John Bolton. They hate Mitt Romney. You would have to believe that that's fake. And I don't believe it's fake. I think that for the core of Trump's base, they genuinely believe what they say. And if Trump goes away, I don't think there's going to be a switch flip where they're like, oh, you know what, that Mitt Romney guy, he was all right. I think to your point, Trump will be kingmaker, and it's going to be Don Jr. It's going to be Ron DeSantis. It's going to be somebody, but Donald Trump, even if he's no longer the candidate, will basically be the godfather, right? He's going to be the power behind the throne.
Well, and think about it. Trump is going to be dealing with his legal cases if he loses. And Trump's not going to want to drift off into the background and no one's defending him. The way he's going to get, in his mind, strength and energy and pressure on his legal cases to go his way is going to be getting those Republicans to travel to his cases and do the thing they did the last time. And this is all witch hunt, blah, blah, blah. And if he takes a Bush approach, and honestly, Obama disappeared for a significant period of time, was really quiet for much of the Trump administration, that necessitates a certain level of respect for the office, which is why they do that. No matter what I feel, I'm not going to degrade the office by coming out as a former president saying the current president's terrible. And I'm going to try to hold off on that. Or a certain level of shame. Bush, I think, understood the disaster that his presidency ended up being to some extent. You remember that clip where he accidentally says an unjust and illegal invasion of Iraq, and then he goes, I mean Ukraine, but Iraq too. I think in his mind, he felt, I gotta just go away, and then I can come back and be an artist and whatever. And Trump's not gonna have respect for the office or shame, so he's going to need, for his own ego, the Republican Party to stay talking about him and how he's going to make the endorsements and how his legal cases are proof that everything's still weaponized against him. And again, I don't think this leads to him running again, but I do think it leads to him being in our lives, for lack of a better phrase, much longer than we want to. It's your girl, Cheryl Queen of Heart, said, great live stream. Thanks. Love this. I'm ready to see the coach versus What do you think that's gonna? What do you think the next
The
part
couch.
of that? Yeah,
The couch.
the coach versus the couch. Let's go Walls as a fake story. But so
should
is
say real
Springfield,
quick,
so we're just
I-
balancing that out.
I should say on the coach versus the couch. We're excited to see it too. It's part of the reason why we went live early, because we wanted to make sure there was plenty of cushion to do some political commentary.
Oh my gosh, that took me longer than I wanted it to. Cassie, we're moving forward from that. Josiah.
Wait, are you saying we're moving on to the next section? Or are we moving on to the next section, Luke? Oh, okay. All right. Well,
other
that's fine.
other couch puns. Jaden, think of a couch pun. Think of another couch pun. I got it. I gotta come back. No, Cassie said, always look forward to the live streams. Great conversations, great production. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Lucy, for the super chats. Let's see. You are something else. You have someone, Sean, thank you. Lano, sorry. Thank you all so much for your super chats. Goodness gracious. The section puns still haunting my mind. I do want to request all of you, if you're thinking, damn, I can't get humor like that anywhere else on a political commentary program, you can subscribe to Josiah's channel if you're watching there, Pondering Politics, my channel, Luke Beasley, if you're watching there, and we'll just keep having a great time all the way through the night. Let's go ahead and play a few moments from the event that Trump, I think, is still doing right now or just wrapped up. Again, the lack of dedication to what he's saying came through so clearly in Wisconsin today.
And outsourced, we're going to outsource and outscore other public school districts. So they want to start off by competing against certain public school districts, and I guess that's a good place to start.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the analysis, Donnie. And then on why he is not doing the 60 Minutes interview, he said this.
CBS is saying that you have pulled out of a planned interview on 60 Minutes. I'd just like you to address that report, and if you indeed are not doing the interview, explain your reasoning why.
Well, right now they came to me and would like me to do an interview, but first I want to get an apology because the last time I did an interview with them, if you remember, they challenged me on the computer. They said the laptop from hell was from Russia, and I said it wasn't from Russia, it was from Hunter, and I never got an apology, so I'm sort of waiting. I'd love to do 60 Minutes. I do everything. I mean, I do you right now, right?
I do you.
What you didn't see in that clip, everybody left the room as soon as he said it, like, no, thank you, and just left. They just walked out.
We heard about the
Wow.
magazine incident with Stormy Daniels. We don't want any of that.
Yeah, no. You know what's funny, though? I can't remember. I remember the 60 Minutes interview where he and Leslie Stahl went back and forth, and then I think he prematurely ended the interview. But I don't remember what was said about the Hunter Biden laptop. And here's the thing. If it were a regular politician, even a Republican politician, I'd be inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt that they were at least discussing the Hunter Biden laptop. But because it's Donald Trump and he is a liar par excellence, I'm not inclined to take him at his word. So I just want to say that for the record. Maybe he's right, but I don't believe him. I need to see proof of what was said during the 60 Minutes interview. And I just don't remember.
I totally agree with you. I do want to address this talking point that seems to be just a matter of habit. People keep asserting it, even though it's not accurate anymore. People keep saying, Kamala just won't do any interviews. Why won't she do any interviews? Blah, blah, blah. Even though she keeps doing more and more interviews. And I'm so tired of the double standard of, Trump talks to the press way more because he did an interview with with Kellyanne Conway. So how often does he do challenging interviews? Well, the 60 Minutes interview some time ago is one example of an actual journalist interviewing him, and he stormed out. The NABJ, he ended up questioning the race of his political opponent. I'm trying to think of other actual journalists interviewing him. Otherwise, he has these little puff piece softball interviews that still don't go well for him. So whenever he gets asked for a town hall, what are you going to do to lower prices? Well, I was the Michigan Man of the Year. Or what are you going to do to protect my job? I was the Michigan Man of the Year. Or what are you going to do to lower childcare costs? That's
No, that was way more coherent. That's not accurate, Luke. That was a way more coherent answer than what Trump actually gave.
That's not something you can say, see, Trump's doing interviews where he addresses policy questions. Why isn't Kamala Harris? First of all, she is. I don't know how many it's been so far, but there have been, I know because I've been covering them, way more frequently interviews that she's doing. She's doing the 60 Minutes one. He's not. But still, there's this knee-jerk mainstream media point about how she just refuses to talk to the press.
Yeah, no. So this is really maddening. And actually, as a matter of fact, and I thought about doing a video on this, but I know the Daily Show gets pretty sensitive when you play clips. But Jon Stewart had a really good monologue yesterday in his episode of the Daily Show where he goes into this and he talks about. I mean, he completely satirizes it as only Jon Stewart can, and talks about that double standard. Donald Trump is incapable of discussing policy. That is a fact. If you're watching this right now on Luke's channel or mine, and you genuinely believe that Donald Trump is some sort of policy wonk who can substantively and directly answer questions, you're just wrong. Get out of here. You're crazy. Actually, but please be sure to like and subscribe first.
Then go.
But yes, and then get out of here. Whereas Vice President Harris can answer questions directly and substantively. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that Harris is the greatest rhetorician in the history of the Democratic Party. I'm not saying that she's President Obama or President Clinton in that respect, but she can answer questions directly, and she answers them far more directly and can quote facts and figures and statistics than Donald Trump can. It's just simply true. If you actually go, even the MSNBC Stephanie Ruhle interview, even Bill Maher called it a softball interview. They were like, they're practically rubbing her feet. I'm sorry. No, Stephanie Ruhle obviously likes Vice President Harris, will vote for Vice President Harris. I don't dispute that. But she asked substantive questions about economic policy, and that's all she asked about. And she did follow-ups, Luke. I'm sorry. And the answers that the vice president gave were good. Again, does she occasionally use these crutch phrases like hopes, dreams, and aspirations? Yes, but for every one instance you can find of that, of Harris, Donald Trump, how many crutch phrases does he have? Bigly, tremendous, some say, how many like verbal crutches does he employ? Far more than she does, and far more frequently. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
We're doing it. I'm doing it to all of you. I am sorry, but here we go.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. I was.
What?
I gotta know. Yeah. I want you to tell me what went through his mind as she was asking that question.
I think he was going, "Oh gosh, I'm so sexy." I think that's what he was saying. I think he was like, that recent clip where he says, "Oh, if I was on the beach, my body would be the most beautiful body." I think he totally forgot she was talking to him and was just saying that I'm so beautiful in his head.
So I think he dropped an F-bomb in his head. I see where you're coming from, where he was probably like, wait, somebody talking? Wait, but I could also see where he's like just gulping and going, oh, F word. So anyway, it's so funny to speculate as to what he was thinking. Okay, go ahead. Let's get through this. Go ahead.
Specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. I was we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare. that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time, coupled with the reductions that I told you about on waste and fraud and all of the other things that are going on in our country. Because I have to stay with childcare. I want to stay with childcare, but those numbers are small relative to the kind of economic numbers that I'm talking about, including growth, but growth also headed up by what the plan is that I just told you about. We're going to be taking in trillions of dollars, and as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kind of numbers we'll be taking in. We're going to make this into an incredible country that can afford to take care of its people, and then we'll worry about the rest of the world. Let's help other people. But we're going to take care of our country first. This is about America first. It's about make America great again. We have to do it because right now we're a failing nation. So
why are they clapping? I don't understand, Josiah. Why are they clapping? That was just
because
some sort of medical event.
They didn't have any music to play him off, Luke, like an awards show. So they were hoping that if they could applaud, he would get that dopamine hit he was looking for and just shut up. Larry Kudlow, I'm pretty sure, was in attendance there. And I wish we could get like zoomed in footage of Donald Trump talking, but just Larry Kudlow's face. Because I imagine he's dying inside.
And again, I don't have the clips here, but that one's just on standby. But I've done segments, I'm sure Josiah has. You compare that to any question about taxes, about child care, about economic growth that Harris gives. And like you said, maybe for a second, while she's putting together what it is that she's about to say clearly, she'll say, and Americans, they have ambitions, and we want to thrive in the strength of, and then she goes into a specific policy answer where she gives a bunch of different particulars. To your point about Jon Stewart, he played a compilation on the show. Maybe I could pull that up where she's going through those specifics. And I don't have the example here, but there's this Fox host that I think about, or a Fox correspondent, rather often we talk about this because she said, and Trump, of course, and she said it so confident. Of course, Trump, he answers things in a succinct, to the point kind of way where he's rich in details, clear to the question that was asked, and leaves you understanding his policy stance. It was something like that. And it's just, how do you not just cry yourself to sleep knowing that you put that out publicly? Gosh.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the one you were referring to, but I'll tell you who said that recently within the past week. Dana Perino on The Five, former press secretary for President Bush, co-host of The Five, supposedly one of the straight news journalists, who hosts with Bill Hemmer, America's Newsroom. She said that on an episode of The Five. She was like, say what you want about Donald Trump, but President Trump started this interview here and he took questions here, and you may not like his answers, but he answered all the questions, and he answered them in a way which shows he has a real grasp of the questions and of policy. Again, you may not like his answers. And I'm like, what? That's how they truly live in a completely different world. I bet if you asked all of the Fox hosts, with the exception of Tarlov and Cavuto, do you think that Donald Trump is like the smartest Republican who's ever lived? Even if they didn't believe it, they'd be like, of course.
Yeah.
It really is. Nobody understands policy like Donald Trump. And it's maddening. Yeah.
Here's a clip from the same Milwaukee speech.
Do you trust the process this time around?
Did I what?
Do you trust the process this time around?
I'll let you know in about 33 days. No, look, I'm in 33 days.
Here we go again, Josiah.
Yeah. Once again, even constitutional processes are purely transactional for Trump. Do elections matter? Only if he wins. Only if he gets the outcome he wants. That in and of itself, there was a time, and actually, I take that back, Luke. There is still a time when a statement like that would disqualify a politician from office, but it would only ever be a Democrat. Can you imagine the backlash that Vice President Harris would get if she answered a question that way and then just laughed about it and like, hey, I'm just kidding. If she said the words, it depends on what happens in 33 days, Republicans would be demanding, like Texas would be trying to secede from the union. Like so the double standard is staggering. And you know what the real sad thing is? No matter what happens in this upcoming election, there will never be a proper redress for all the hypocrisy coming out of the Republican Party. And I don't know if there is a way to redress it other than for Republican politicians to lose every possible election and get basically a national timeout, which in a saner world, that's exactly what would happen. But they're going to be able to say these things with impunity, and there's never going to be a way to hold them accountable for corroding the entire process that we have. I mean, I imagine election denialism is going to be very prominent in elections for a generation, at least.
Right. And that's, you put it nicely, there's never going to be justice, really. I mean, I guess Trump's legal cases, in some sense, with him. But I'm happy it failed in Nebraska. But the fact that they were attempting, right before the election, to change the electoral rules so that that one electoral vote couldn't potentially swing the election in favor of Harris, right before the election, when you might remember when they would scream about the election lies and then we would knock them all down, they would go, okay, fine, we can't prove the massive dumps of ballots, but how about they adjusted some stuff for the pandemic so that more mail-in ballots, whatever the claim was. And you can't change rules right before. Blah, blah, blah. That was proof that Trump was justified in just tossing out the Constitution to keep himself in office. And then they tried to do it. And it's just, we don't have to agree on everything. We really don't. There are people, I won't name an issue, because right now that's not the point of it. And some people will be like, oh, do you really think it's okay to blah, blah, blah? Yes, most of the issues we talk about, it's actually acceptable. And I have people in my life who are so far from me, and I do think their view is damaging, but they're a fantastic, fantastic person. But we can't completely throw out any dedication to these basic values and to being sort of logically consistent. How dare you? How dare you complain about rules that were public health related, that you have concocted this scenario in your head where if those things didn't happen, then you could have won the election for years, and say that's why we should throw out our democracy, and then try to do the same thing? Or how dare you say, I'm going to release a report, which Trump has been saying for years now, that proves all the election fraud. Fail, fail, fail. He never does. He never does. And no one cares. Oh, it's going to be proven in court. No, I promise eventually it's going to be proven in court. I had a lady, as an example, who said, Luke, I remember this rally. She had this really notable laugh. If you've watched this TikTok before, you know what I'm talking about. She says, I don't think Biden's the president. I said, who do you think? She said, Trump. Blah, and then laughed a bunch of times. And that woman told me, I can tell you for certain Trump's going to be ushered back in by the military before the end of Biden's term. Biden's term is about to be over. And there's so many people who just will never change their views. But you just realized clearly you don't have the correct mechanisms or the correct source of information to be making these freaking conclusions. So stop it. Clearly the people you trust are wrong, but no one ever cares. It's like they want to believe something they know might be true or false because it feels good, instead of going through the hard process of actually being correct in your political views.
I think some of it, too, here's where I am, to be perfectly candid with you. I do think some of it is to own the libs. I think there are people out there who cling to conspiracy theories and unproven allegations and all these things in part because they know it pisses off a lot of Democrats, right? I genuinely believe that. Like, when I've had conversations with MAGA Republicans in person and in debates and in conversations online, where, you know, there's a smugness like, well, wait, where's your evidence? I don't need evidence. I believe it. And you can almost see the smirk on their face. Like, I know me saying this is pissing you off. And I do believe that the own the libs component's a huge part of it. I'll also say the Nebraska thing is really telling in how it's juxtaposed compared to COVID era changes to how ballots could be cast for a few reasons. Number one, those changes also occurred in red states. not just blue states, red states too. Mail-in ballot is not a phenomenon. Absentee ballots are not a phenomenon which exists exclusively in blue states. Moreover, where they are, blue or red states, anybody can avail themselves. If you're a Republican voter, you too can use mail-in voting. If you are a Democratic voter in a red state, you too can use mail-in voting. And that's really the difference between what Democrats do. See, we Democrats believe we can win competitive elections. That's why I say this. I want Republicans to lose every election. I do. But I would never want Republicans to not be able to vote. I think that we should increase voter eligibility. I think there should be automatic voter registration, not just for Democrats. Not like, oh, you want to be a Democrat? Yeah, you're automatically registered. Oh, you're a Republican? Sorry, you got to go through this labyrinthine process. I don't want that. I want automatic voter registration, not just in California, but West Virginia and Alabama. The reason, in part because I want that, not just because it's a civic virtue where I think voting, should be something that's treasured by everybody for all political parties, is I have confidence that we can win those elections. Will we always win those elections? No. But what's funny is I have more faith in the Republican Party's ability to win competitive elections than the Republican Party does. And that's the difference. What they did in Nebraska was try to change the rules at the 11th hour to truly rig it in favor of Donald Trump. They did it knowing that if they had succeeded in their gambit, it would have been too late for Maine to do the same thing, to cancel out their shenanigans, which is what Maine Democrats threatened to do back in April when Nebraska Republicans looked to change those voting rules. Maine does it the same way. They're basically the antithesis of Nebraska in that respect. And they said, hey, you changed it to a winner-take-all system so that blue dot, which is Omaha, goes away. We're going to do it in Maine. And that little red dot in Maine goes away, and we'll cancel it out. So Republicans, they bided their time. They waited. And in Maine, in order to change those sorts of rules, you have to do it with, there's like a 90-day limit. And then once it gets within 90 days of an election, none of those rules can be changed. And then, of course, what happened? Lindsey Graham flew out to Nebraska to try to make the appeal on Donald Trump's behalf. And it took one Republican who, by the way, used to be a Democrat. That's the only reason that Nebraska's rules did not change. And that's the difference. When Democrats change the rules, for the most part, we do it in a way which actually benefits Republicans too, because Republicans can employ absentee and mail-in voting. When Republicans change the rules, they do it almost exclusively to benefit themselves. And that really just goes to show the difference between the two parties.
Hey, while we're upset, let's just keep it going. Here's a moment that I covered on my members only bonus show, which you can get access to by clicking the join button if you're watching on my channel. And it's of Byron Donalds with Keith Boykin, I think his name is. Just, I can't properly put into words how irritated this phenomenon that's being represented by Byron Donalds here in his lie about crime makes me.
So according to those gentlemen there, saying that Trump is a threat to democracy is violent rhetoric, but Trump saying, let's just have one really violent day, that is not violent rhetoric?
No, he didn't say one violent day. That's not even what he said. But let's be honest about what he actually said. Play it again.
Trump
again. Play it again, because he didn't even say that. But go ahead.
Can we play it again?
I want to hear it.
All these stores go out of business, right? They don't pay rent. Then the city doesn't have money. It's a chain of events that's so bad. One rough hour, and I mean real rough, the word will get out and it will end immediately. End immediately.
How is that not violent rhetoric?
We have to acknowledge the reality going on in every city in America.
Not answering the question. Not answering the question.
That is answering the question. Because the reality in America, hold on, Keith, the reality in America is that crime is massively up.
Crime is not massively up. That's a lie.
You can bang the table all you want, but that's
lying,
not true.
Congressman. You're lying.
We already know that there are cities.
The FBI just released data this week that crime is going down.
We already know that.
Oh my God! Abby, why do you let this man lie on your national television like this?
I'm telling you the exact
This is not right.
You may not
You're a liar,
you may not.
Congressman.
No, I'm
You're
not.
lying.
Because you're lying to the American people now. And so I want to be respectful of what you're trying to say.
Hang on a second. If you would just let me talk. I will explain exactly what you want me to explain. We have the data. The FBI literally put out data today showing that crime is down this year for the first 6 months of the year. But look at the trend.
And then you can see the numbers there. Josiah, this is the thing that freaks me out. It's not the disagreement. It's when we don't agree, quote unquote, or when often MAGA doesn't agree on what are the facts. Then we can have our opinions. There are facts, and then we can have our opinions about those facts. So we can interpret what is to make a determination about what ought to be. We can say this should be, like we should have this healthcare system based on the facts of our current healthcare system. Or this should be our approach to crime given our current crime stats. But there's so much now. There's this acceptable behavior, especially within MAGA, to look, it's on screen, at the crazy plummet in crime we've been seeing just at the beginning of this year, not to mention 2023, this huge plummet, and to say it's up. Well, if it's up now, it was even worse under Trump, apparently, you're saying, even before the pandemic spike. So I don't know how we get out of this, Josiah. I know you're much calmer than me on this, but it really freaks me out when I realize, oh, we've gone there. We've gone to a place where otherwise intelligent, respected people will stare you in the eyes and try to convince you what is reality isn't.
Well, there's an argument to be made that at this point we live in a post-fact world, and that Trump and Kellyanne Conway, whom we mentioned earlier, the person who introduced the phrase alternative facts or alternate facts into the mainstream political zeitgeist. I'm not saying that they're necessarily the source of this, but they are certainly major contributors, such that I think in their absence, I'm not sure we'd be here. But again, it goes back to, Luke, I really think a lot of this also has to do with owning the libs. I think that when MAGA Republicans are confronted with an inconvenient fact, a no you is all they need. And then when you get upset about it, which I often am as well, I'm very frustrated. We got you. We provoked a reaction. Right. And the thing is, there's no consequence. There's no political consequence to them ignoring facts. And this is really what it's about. That's why I want every Republican, every elected Republican, to lose their elections. As far as I'm concerned, all of them, unless it's like the guy who is the mayor of like Mesa, Arizona, or Colorado, the one, Mayor Giles, who endorsed Vice President Harris. Because the only thing that will ever cause a reboot for the Republican Party is a string of brutal political defeats. Appealing to the GOP's better angels has not worked, will not work. There's no reason to believe it will work. Even monetary consequences, consider, even though they're not politicians, Fox News, again, had to pay the biggest recorded defamation settlement in the media that we have ever seen. $800 million, 787 to be exact. They've changed nothing. As a matter, you could make the argument they are more closely aligned with Trump than they were even at the time of signal boosting his 2020 election lies. The only thing that will ever get the Republican Party out of this point, and which will motivate the leaders to then motivate the followers, is relentless defeat. If they know that this MAGA our feelings don't care about your facts sort of thing, like I don't care what the FBI says, it says something that's inconvenient to us, unless they pay endless political consequences, they will not change. And that's why I think it's incumbent on us. I say this on my videos all the time. It's not enough to just elect Vice President Harris. We also have to retake the House. We have to keep the Senate. And then Democrats actually have to wield that power. We can't just keep playing things move by move, inch by inch. Once we get power, Democrats actually have to ruthlessly wield power for the betterment of the country. Passing, for example, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Break the filibuster if you have to. Make it a matter of federal law that maximizing eligible votership is the law of the land, and that red states and conservative legislatures that fear, that dread. We have it on record. We've heard Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham and Republican attorneys argue even in front of the Supreme Court about how they feel that maximum eligible voter turnout is their doom. Make it so that it's not a matter of negotiation anymore. This is what I like, by the way, about Governor Walz. I should say this, getting back to the debate tonight. Governor Walz has had a 1-seat majority in the Minnesota legislature. But Luke, he has wielded that power responsibly and relentlessly. He goes to the Republicans and says, hey, listen, here's what I want to do. Let's negotiate. But if you try to stop me, I have the power. You do not. And I will go through you if need be. One way or another, I will get my agenda passed. The question is, will you in good faith negotiate that agenda with me and get some things that you want in return? Or am I just going to use the power at my disposal? That is the attitude that a Harris-Walz administration has to have. We have to give her the presidency. We have to give her the Senate. We have to give her the House. And they have to ruthlessly wield that power in a way which betters the country. That's the only way that MAGA Republican politicians, in my opinion, will ever learn.
Absolutely correct. You know, one thing that I am also concerned with, we talk a lot about the right-wing world, whether it be the political sort of elected officials or the media figures, how that's going to be not forever changed, hopefully, but indefinitely, severely changed by the presence of Trump. And what Trump did was, we've had dishonesty for a very long time, but he allowed for and demonstrated the way you can do politics in a uniquely dishonest fashion, where you set up necessarily for your side to defend you a bubble that they can live in where other things are true, so that then you make sense as a candidate. And he's shown you can actually set up a political infrastructure that doesn't punish you for being just super duper not normal politics dishonesty, but extra dishonest. And then the media, the social media arms of your movement follow. So that is going to be a right-wing, uniquely bad in the right-wing problem for a long time. And it's something we talk about a lot. What freaks me out, though, as well, is when that happens, there's a certain political power to that, right? There's a certain strength to being able to invent facts, then convince nearly a majority of the country of these fake things, and then make that a part of the discourse. Why is it that some Americans think crime is actually going up? Is crime actually going up? Maybe it is. No, it's not. It's just people are being convinced of that by Fox News. Don't legitimize it. Or we see the way these things have to be discussed, the sane washing, as it's been called, by networks like CNN that aren't right-wing, but just are trying to normally cover something that's not normal. And then they end up making seem normal a lot of lies and premises that are really dangerous. But I say all that because that's part of why Trump has been able to do the things he has been able to do. There's a strength to it that's bad, that's dark, that's terrible. But if you can just stand on a stage and say whatever you want and not have to care at all about if you're backing it up with data or facts, that's an easier job than actually knowing what you're talking about, obviously. Well, what that does is it then creates an unbalanced scale politically where the other side feels that they're getting clobbered on things like the border's open, 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 the border's crime's up, crime's up, crime's up, crime's up, economy bad, economy bad, economy bad, economy. And I see this already in some quote unquote left-wing online content and social media left-wing content for sure. That incentivizes people to go, shoot, well, then the only way we're going to win is to push propaganda of our own. And there has been for sure and this is a massive group of entities and people that I'm referring to, and some are doing incredible work, some in the middle, some not as much. There are people left of center who are getting more and more fast and loose with the facts, loosey-goosey with the facts. And you don't want to blame it because everyone should have an obligation to the facts. But there is this push towards the other side than just to try to balance the scale, also ripping away and going, well, if they're going to say everything that we're saying is a lie anyways, we might as well have more perfectly aligned with what we want and not perfectly aligned with the facts sort of statements we're making. And that's how you get these two bubbles drifting further and further apart. And I don't know at what point is that not something that can function in a democracy, which is why Trump's sort of dictator thing is working more than it has in the past. Because eventually, democracy relies on some common reality so that we can make decisions on governance together. And I guess my request, my call to action to anyone in our space is we have to be politically effective and strong without sacrificing our dedication to the truth, because that's where we get really dangerous. And hopefully, we can electorally punish MAGA into being more dedicated to the truth in the next decade, let's say.
Yeah, so I think that's a good caveat to add, but that to me increases the urgency of it. I mean, I can tell you, Luke, as somebody who has in many ways become increasingly radical, like with respect to the Supreme Court, I'm a firm believer, after having conversations with, for example, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who, God willing, if we keep the Senate majority, will become the Senate Judiciary Chairman. Because with all due respect to Senator Dick Durbin, Sheldon Whitehouse is bold. He is progressive. He recognizes the danger posed by this rogue Supreme Court. So, for example, Senator Ron Wyden, who is the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, he just dropped a big, bold piece of legislation a few days ago. I think it was last Wednesday, calling for major Supreme Court reform, even more than what President Biden recommended. So, for example, he would want to expand the court to 15 justices. He'd want it rolled out over 12 years, but he would take it ultimately from 9 to 15 over the span of 12 years. There would be mandatory IRS audits of all the justices, all liberal, conservative, it doesn't matter. The disclosures would not only be mandatory, the executive branch would audit you and they would make those disclosures public. There would be a supermajority requirement to strike down federal law as unconstitutional. So if the Supreme Court wants to take a federal law and say, you can't do it, then a simple majority won't be enough. You need a supermajority to do it, to increase the threshold, make it not so easy for the Supreme Court to strike down congressional law. There would be a way for a supermajority of the justices to remove a justice from a case if that justice won't recuse themselves, and so on and so forth. It increases the checks and balances. Buddy, I'm there. Some people say, no, we can't do anything. The Supreme Court's an institution. We can't meddle with it. No, we have 3 coordinate branches of government, and the Supreme Court was never intended to be the most powerful branch, and in many ways it is, because it can strike down presidential executive orders. It can strike down congressional federal law. It can basically impose checks on the other 2 branches, but then they turn around and say, you can't impose checks on us. Ethics requirements? Nah. Financial disclosures? Nah. Recusal requirements? Nah. No, that doesn't work for me. It needs to be the weakest of the 3 branches, especially because they're not elected and they're not subject to re-election. And if you don't have to go through all those burdens of being a politician, all those checks, which is what an election is, that is a check that we the people have on the political branches, then no, I believe that the other 2 branches can impose ruthless checks on you. The reason I'm bringing that up, though, is because I agree with you that we should not be radicalized in many of the ways that MAGA is, like just being absolutely dishonest. But what it means is, because we still have to color within the lines, so to speak, in a way that they don't have to, that means when we do win elections, it's so important for Democrats to actually wield the power and not just hope and pray, not thoughts and prayers, that the Republicans will see the light. So I agree with you. I just think that we have to say, when we win elections, we have to wield power to democratize the country. And we can ask nicely the Republicans to play along, but if they say no, then we need to do what Tim Walz does in Minnesota and say, well, I have the power, you do not, and I will get my way if you don't work with me in good faith.
Totally agree with the conclusion there. And I have to be honest, as I was preparing the next things that we're going to watch, I zoned out on the list of reforms you're talking about, so I can't endorse or not endorse what you just said there, but I will say the conclusion I was fully listening for, and I totally agree, because you just have to. If you're not going to get bipartisan governance with people who agree on basic facts and they could take power later, you have to aggressively govern. It just has to be based on a foundation of truth still. And I won't cite any particular examples now, but if you spend enough time online, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
Getting-
they're out there.
Yeah.
They're out there.
On our side, getting more and more propagandistic is not the solution in my mind. Let's check in on a quick Pennsylvania voters. I guess they're going to be undecided or something. I don't know why. Here on NBC.
Today, I mean, I'm really thankful, right? Largest barrage of ballistic missiles ever shot at a country in history. And the U.S. supported Israel and shot down missiles along with Jordan and Israel. And so I'm so incredibly thankful for that. And a big Biden fan today.
Are you still thinking you might vote Republican?
I am still undecided. Yes, absolutely. Because I think every day right now is so utterly critical, and watching how this continues to unfold.
And what about you, Meryl?
And for me, today just verified what I've already felt, that the Biden-Harris administration has been very pro-Israel. Today was really an existential threat for the state of Israel once again. And the United States and the Biden administration, along with Vice President Harris, really stepped up.
So you're definitely voting Harris going into tonight's debate.
Yes.
Let me turn to Claire and Brian. Both of you voted for Trump in 2016, then went away from Trump in 2020, and now you're both considering former President Trump again, even though I think you said you don't really like J.D. Vance very much.
I really don't like either of them very much.
Who does?
I'm looking at something different. I want something different. I'm not really sure where we're going to end up.
So maybe tonight you hear something that pushes you?
Maybe if tonight I hear something, it might make up my mind. I'm still kind of up in the air, but.
Claire, you said to me that you're a little worried if you vote for Trump, you wouldn't be able to, you'd have to lie to your friends.
I mean, I think it's hard to vote for anyone. The keyboard killers, no matter which way. I mean, you vote, in this town democratically, and someone's like, well, you voted for this mayor, and then you see something federally, and they say, well, you voted for that president, no matter which side you're on.
Brendan, you said that your community, which I think is a predominantly black community, is more divided right now, more at odds than you've seen it in an election.
Yeah, so it just seems like there is no real middle ground. Everything is radicalized. Everything is extreme, kind of like what she was saying. Yeah. But more so from my community, being young and African American, it seems like a lot of people are coming to the topic of politics late, and they're missing nuance. So what they're hearing right now is stirring a lot of passion that's bringing them one way or another.
And John, real quick, one word.
Okay, again, I just said, I gotta be honest, transparent with y'all, I do get really confused and baffled by this undecided thing. I say with love. My best understanding is that probably you haven't, because of people living busy lives, work, children, family, etc. There's a lot going on and haven't really engaged yet and paid attention. And so maybe if you're just starting that now, you're undecided, but I don't get it. But regardless, to address what one of the last guys said there, both sides are so radical. It's not about my stance and going, well, not compared to me because I'm a lot. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you look at the proposals of Vice President Kamala Harris, she's proposing in some of her tax cut things, her small business things that ordinarily you would associate with the Republican Party. She's talking about the most lethal fighting force in the world for our military. She's running a pro-freedom, pro-liberty, pro-patriotism campaign with proposals that I like, but are very much middle-of-the-road sort of things. It's just not true. Even though it sounds simpler, it feels simpler, it's an easier analysis to go, well, both sides must just be extreme, and that's why we're so divided. There is extremism on both sides, but the two candidates don't represent their extremism within their side equally. Harris just doesn't. She just doesn't. Look at what she's proposing. Name one proposal. That's crazy. They'll cite clips of her saying more far-left things in her 2020 campaign or in 2019. That's not her campaign that we're talking about. I'm saying this campaign, what is radical? Enhancing the child tax credit? Socialism. Wait, but Trump wanted to enhance the child tax credit at some point in time. Again, some of these different things that you would associate with Republicans in times gone by before it became all MAGA, we have to stop. And so I request to any of you to bring this up in a loving way to people in your life who do this simplified analysis. We have to reject the both sidesism of the division in our country. There are, on social media, every day I come across them scrolling through some of the people I'm talking about who are detached from the facts, who are on the left. They are participating in dividing our country further. Totally. And they're way too radical on things. But where each party is does not reflect a political moment where you can say, oh, the candidates for both parties are equally dividing the country. No, wrong.
Yeah, so this is a trope which is ancient, and there's a reason it's been around so long. So when you are disengaged or when you're uncomfortable, the easiest default, and the default that is the least likely to radically offend whomever it is you're talking to, is taking the moderate approach. I remember being a young lad growing up in rural Kentucky, and if you were liberal, the best thing to say is that you're fiscally conservative but socially liberal, right? Because the fiscal conservatism would soften the blow of social liberalism, right? And it's the same thing, right? You don't know who you're talking to. You're not particularly engaged on the topic. And maybe you are. Maybe you are engaged on the topic. Maybe you actually know that the two parties are not comparable. But you don't want to risk a fight with whomever it is you're talking to, or an awkward moment. And so you appeal to both sidesism and false equivalence. There's a reason that that trope exists. I understand that. But it is pervasive in a way when the two... Like, can you imagine... Okay. Just to make the point, imagine, looking back, being in a history class and looking and someone talking about, the Civil War. I mean, sure, Jefferson Davis, he had his issues, but I mean, Lincoln wasn't perfect. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Okay, what about the Second World War? I mean, that Hitler and Mussolini, they're not great, but I mean, FDR did some shady stuff, which he did, as a matter of fact. But to pretend that in these examples, to create a false moral equivalence here, would be seen as wildly irresponsible. People would say, hey, listen, it is true that President Lincoln accrued a lot of executive power. He defied the Supreme Court of the United States. He did actually arrest people, without writ of habeas corpus. He did do things that people could criticize. But to create a moral equivalence between the Union and the Confederacy and President Lincoln and Jefferson Davis is gross and irresponsible. And it's not nuanced to suggest such a thing. And the same thing with an analysis of the Second World War. Now, people come back and say, Josiah, well, those are just easy, lopsided examples. We really have an easy, lopsided example in today's politics, too. No one's saying that Vice President Harris and the Democrats are perfect. No one's saying that you can't make nuanced criticisms of them. But in every meaningful way, the Democratic Party's platform and politicians and policies and record are objectively superior to those of the Republican Party. And they're quite frankly better for conservative voters, too, which is why Wall Street Journal just published this, Luke. Red counties all across this country are more federally dependent than blue counties. Red states they struggle on average with education and health and finances in the economy in ways that blue states on average don't. Not that blue states are perfect bastions of civilization and red states are like dystopian hellholes. It's not what I'm saying. My point is that on average on the metrics, Republican leadership doesn't deliver meaningful results for Republican constituents unless you're a Republican billionaire. And then you should probably vote Republican because you're in better hands there. But if you're the average Republican voter, I'm sorry. Facts are facts, and facts don't care about your feelings, gang. You are better off under the leadership of Democrats than Republicans.
I know this was like 2 minutes ago, but I'm still reeling off of you saying fiscally conservative, socially liberal, because I think it's because we both grew up in red states. There's something that so uniquely gets like knots created in my back when people say that because I've heard it so many times. Every time my answer, and I know this is so condescending, and I'm trying to be better. Be best.
Don't be Luke. Be worse. Be worse. Don't be best.
I'm trying to be best, as Melania taught us. But I usually just say no. Like when people say, "Oh, I'm socially liberal, fiscally conservative," I go, "You're not, though." But that's cool that you are saying that. But no, that's not true. Because most of the time, that's just a closeted liberal right there, which is fine. We're gonna get you to come out as a Democrat. But I have friends. I have a friend sitting in the room right now as we're doing this broadcast that applies to that description, where almost always, because what is being fiscally conservative? Is it running up more in terms of the deficits as Republicans do? Is it adding more to the debt as Republicans do? Is it being worse for the economy as Republicans? And this isn't even you're thinking, oh, these are two liberals. Let's tune out at that. No. This isn't liberal conservative. This is just the last century of data that we have objectively analyzed, you would say, by the metrics we use, by the standard we apply to this, Democrats have overseen. You could say, but that's not because of Democrat. Fine. But no argument there in terms of the last century and the record between the two parties. Show. What does fiscally conservative mean then? Because they're not better at cutting spending, if you think it's that. They're not better at cutting, or what would it be, raising taxes to address the debt. They're not better at any of the things that you would think classify as that. You just fell for a nice phrase that sounds sexy and doesn't offend the girl that you're flirting with.
I should say real quick, because I know the debate's about to start. One other thing I wanted to address, because it's come up a couple of times in your chat and mine, and I have no doubt that it will come up in the debate. You were going to hear something to the effect of, why aren't you all doing it already in terms of Governor Walz and Vice President Harris's agenda? I just want to make clear a couple of things real quick. The Vice President of the United States does not set policy. The Vice President of the United States does not. Donald Trump was President of the United States for 4 years. So my hope is if J.D. Vance tries to hit Governor Walz with that question, Governor Walz will explain that and then flip it and say, actually, your guy was president. Your guy had the top job. Why didn't he build a wall? Why didn't he repeal and replace Obamacare? Why didn't he pass an infrastructure bill? Why didn't he? And go on. That's very, very important. Do not buy into that framing. Not buy into that framing.
And just to be clear, why didn't they do it yet? Because they were busy doing other historic things, to be clear. Vice President Harris should stand on, so Tim Walz should stand on the Biden-Harris record, which is one of, I won't go through the whole list because I don't even think we have time before this thing's about to start, but you've heard both of us go through it many times. It's this stunning recovery, a plummeted crime, one piece of legislation after another that has been historic, and just because Fox News ignores all that, just because a lot of mainstream media ignores all that, doesn't make it not true. So a big thing I don't know why people don't add to what you said either is not just, well, oh, she didn't have the power, but with the power she did have, she participated in what was a historic legislative set of victories, and the fact that they just get to ignore all of that is another example of how wonky this political environment is.
It is. I think it's ready. I think chat's saying that it's going on. It's 9 o'clock.
Right, here we go.
President of the United States, Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know, it's at the end of this little journey, Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Luke, people are asking in your chat to turn it up if you can.
Vice presidential debate.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate, who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene, and now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today, actually, a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years. Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing worse by the climate.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our #1 export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children.
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him to, what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules. And it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Lankford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn now to the economy. Thank you,
Margaret. The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a
show
gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says. But look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duval, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But
this,
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Josiah.
Yeah, so I don't know how long we have. I'll just say, as I expected, this is a much closer debate in terms of substance and delivery. There's no doubt that J.D. Vance is an accomplished debater. He's very confident. He is a very smooth, extemporaneous speaker compared to Governor Walz. So the reports about Walz's nervousness are clearly true. I think that the weakest moment was obviously when they pressed him on the China timeline thing, which is really frustrating because that was a timeline event prior to him going into politics 35 years ago. and even the thing itself. You said it was July, but it was actually August. Like, okay, guys, come on.
I didn't know that. That was from he made that statement before. You're saying, or you think
it was? Well, I think he. I
35
thought
years
that. Oh my God! Now I need to be fact checked. I thought it was a timeline event from 1989. He may have referenced it more recently,
Okay.
but then it's easy to confuse something that happened 35 years ago. So he should have just said, "Listen, I got the timeline wrong. I fudged it. I'm sorry. I misspoke. There's no doubt about it. Let's just clear the air on this." And then either attack Donald Trump and JD Vance on their mistruths, which are much more pertinent. But I'll tell you what made it worse was the moderators just leaving that pause hanging. Like he was done talking, Luke, and they just left that pause. Very weird.
That was weird.
And then I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I was about to start a big list, so you finish up. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, no, this is the last thing I was going to say is so then they turn, of course, to JD Vance's various dishonesties with regard to Donald Trump, and there's an implicit equivalence created there. Hey, you fudged a timeline from a thing 35 years ago. Also, JD Vance, you've repeatedly lied about your own damn running mate in the past 4 years. What about that? But I think that when the topic turned back to abortion, Governor Walz found his groove again. He's still going to be a rougher, extemporaneous speaker compared to JD Vance, but he had his passion, he had his confidence, and I think he got his groove back.
Yeah, I would say number one I put down on my list is Vance's eyeliner was on point. Number two, Walz was definitely a little shaky at the beginning, but got sort of similar to our analysis right off the bat with Vice President Harris. But I think I was projecting onto her a little bit because I went back and watched the debate, and it actually wasn't as shaky as I remembered it right off the bat. And then obviously she ended up destroying Trump. But here, to your point, it's sort of like, as vice presidential debates typically are, this is not going to move the needle one way or another, right? It would have to be something real crazy to make an impact at all in the election for a debate like this. But given that, we just got to be honest. Vance, as dishonest as many of the underlying assumptions or points are that he's making, he's just better in this format at coming off smooth, articulate, succinct. And I don't think Walz's folksy guy, lovable dad energy comes through quite as much in this format because he's also trying to make debate points. And so the sort of friendly vibe contrast isn't there as much as I would like it to be, which is the nature of such a debate. Let's see. He didn't, I will just say to, criticize the guy that I much more significantly favor. Walz never addressed the preemptive strike by Israel question, but did make some strong points there. And then I thought the Walz steady leadership line about Kamala was a good one because I do think a lot of Americans resonate with the chaotic versus more stable contrast between the two. The climate change, renewable energy. I even texted Josiah off the stream, obviously, saying, wow, this is a really strong part for Walz because the climate change Vance lines weren't that strong. I thought Vance did get strong punches in, even if Walz had a strong refutation on the border stuff. And it's weird they haven't thought of a more effective response to that border security bill, because it's a talking point, but it's a strong one that Democrats should keep bringing up. But it's weird that Trump and Vance, neither of them just said any talking point. All right, we're back.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting, and I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, yeah. Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess
prices.
we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA, and the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley. 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is...
So you think the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time.
ahead,
We have a
Nora.
number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay working care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress works. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually she had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag. Several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state Capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence, and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement, but this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
It's upsetting that one of the things that was exciting about the Harris debate, and this, I know it's just so different, was as it went along, she got stronger. There were a lot of moments here that I thought were worse than anything we saw at the beginning, other than the China moment. And again, on the substance, you can always say that, but we're obviously analyzing a lot of the non-substance things because that's what these debates are so often about. I would say I love that Walz turned the question to Vance and said, will you admit that Trump lost the election? And Vance going, what about censorship? It's just like, what? What are you talking about? So that was good. But that closing little moment there is like, this is the most slam dunk issue because it is the most important one, our democracy. And no, you can't bring up Hillary Clinton saying something here or there. Some of the things I might even deem to be inappropriate, that comparing to this months-long effort of allegedly illegal schemes to prevent Biden from coming into office, it's just not even comparable. I understand the Waltz appeal is that everyday sort of guy's guy, and I think it plays out great. Obviously, his polls show that. This just doesn't happen to be the forum where, compared to Vance's smooth talking dishonesty, he's able to effectively deliver some of those key lines.
Yeah, so again, I think that Walz is not a particularly smooth, extemporaneous debater. He's clearly nervous. Unlike Vice President Harris, he has not overcome that nervousness like meaningfully, but also he's up against a much more formidable opponent than Vice President Harris was. JD Vance is much smarter and much more effective as a speaker and debater than Donald Trump. But still, I think overall, Walz is doing extremely well, certainly on the substance and certainly in terms of being fact-based. His answers to questions about abortion and gun control and January 6th, these are all very effective, passionate response. Housing as well, healthcare. I think these are really, really good moments. Vance is just a more consistently smooth liar. I think that that exchange about January 6th was excellent. Could Walz have still done better and stayed on message even more? Perhaps. But asking that question, flipping it, do you agree that Donald Trump lost? You could make the case that Vance lost the debate because nothing. The only thing that Walz did, which was as clumsy as what Vance did, was when he misspoke and said that I became friends with school shooters. But everyone's going to know that he misspoke there because of nerves.
Yeah.
Whereas Vance refusing to answer the question about did Donald Trump win the election, that wasn't because of nervousness. That's because he can't answer the question truthfully. And even though January 6th isn't front and center on Americans' brains, when January 6th is mentioned and is polled, more Americans than not still find it disgraceful and pathetic, and they don't like Donald Trump's refusal to accept the results of elections. Also good for pointing out, by the way, if we cut back to it, just cut me off. Also good to point out that there is a false equivalence that Vance was creating. Hillary Clinton formally publicly conceded the 2016 election after Donald Trump won, publicly called him privately to congratulate him. She did not conspire with Vice President Biden and President Obama to steal the election from Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton was morally, ethically superior by far to Donald Trump and behaved responsibly. The Republicans are objectively far worse on this issue. But I think that Walz may have won the debate with that exchange on January 6th. He just has to stay in the pocket and ride out the remainder of this.
Well, that's what I would say. These debates I know you all know this, but are so much about the sound bites that come of it. And what Harris did brilliantly in her debate with Trump was create a bunch of those sound bites, and then Trump accidentally or whatever created some crazy ones that were bad for him. Here, there weren't very many moments that were like, ba, 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 except for that January 6th related one, which is good because that's an important point. It was delivered effectively by Walz, and Vance is, because in the soundbite version, you won't even get what he's talking about. He's just saying censorship. Because I can tell you most Americans have no clue what you're talking about here. We're back when it comes to Harris censored.
Back to the CBS News vice presidential debate. It is now time for the closing statements. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Strong.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Norah O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
So I want to watch how long they talk with each other.
Talking all kinds of smack.
This is just, I find this so weird, this part. Trump and Harris walked right off. It just, right? I love the idea of politics being where you walk up at the end and you're, oh, yeah. But just something feels off.
I wonder if he's like saying, Walt, Tim, can you introduce me to those school shooters that you said you befriended?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Waltz's closing statement was strong. Vance's, while delivered rhetorically effectively, I cannot. It's fine. This is the world we live in. You and I are really lucky for the jobs we have. I need to not get so angry about having to hear these talking points so often. But hello. Yes, she's been vice president. Whatever. Facts don't matter because she's been vice president as a part of an administration that has seen policy successes along with results that while the pain that was left behind by the pandemic and Trump's mishandling of it is still so present, I wish people would dive into what were the causes of the pain and then how were those things handled by the people currently in power. And then this whole, well, why hasn't she done anything while she's in power thing? Yeah, other than the more legislatively effective record of Biden-Harris than we've seen in decades from an administration. So that was the big premise of his thing. The unfortunate part, Josiah, and I don't know how to break through to people who just refuse to sort of engage with some of the stuff we talk about on a daily basis, that works on a lot of people. A lot of people hear, wait, you're right. A lot of problems I feel like have been exacerbated in the last few years. That must be not because of a global crisis that then was handled effectively by Biden-Harris, but instead because of them. Yeah, I don't know how to...
No, listen,
words I've chosen to use.
No, listen. So I think that part is so important, and maybe others don't. Maybe because, in my opinion, professional Democratic surrogates and politicians are not spending nearly enough time on this, and they're doing it professionally. So maybe they know something we don't. Maybe it wouldn't be effective to say exactly what you said, what I have said repeatedly in the fact checks, which is if the standard is that the person in power did not accomplish a thing, ergo they are unfit to wield that power again, that's a fine standard to have. Probably a bit reductive, given that we do have separation of powers and 2 political parties and 3 branches of government. But that's a fine standard to have. By that definition, though, you should hold your own party to the same standard. Donald Trump wasn't vice president. The vice president of the United States has very few constitutional duties. They preside over the Senate, and not even that anymore because they're more a creature of the executive branch. That's why you have a Senate president pro tem who presides over hearings in the Senate. So even that is no longer really the case for vice presidents, except for like special occasions, states of the union, the certification of electoral ballots, electoral college ballots during January 6th. Other than that, their constitutional authority is to have a pulse in the event that the president of the United States dies or resigns. That's it. So everything else in their purview comes from what the president is willing to give them, not because they have the constitutional authority to snap their fingers. So with that in mind, Donald Trump wasn't vice president. He was president. He was the most powerful man on earth, the most powerful person in this country for 4 years. And he failed to get done far more. Like his agenda, even this is something I've said before, take value out of the equation. Let's say that you hate everything that Joe Biden and Vice President Harris have done, and you love everything that Trump did. The bottom line is if you look at their agenda, who checked off more boxes? Even if you hate the fact that they did, because you hate what they did, you disagree with everything. Biden and Harris have checked off more boxes. They have accomplished more of their agenda than Trump did of his. That's a measure of competence. I'm sorry, it is. And the fact of the matter is that much of what Biden and Harris accomplished are things that the Trump administration promised to do. Pass an infrastructure bill, get us out of Afghanistan, cap insulin $35 for seniors, allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices, and on and on and on. Biden and Harris got that done. Trump failed. So by that logic, Trump is less fit to be president, objectively, than Kamala Harris because she hasn't actually been president. So yeah, there's probably a way, where it's not 11 o'clock at night for, messengers and surrogates to make that more succinct. But I do think that's a point worth making because it's something that Trump and Vance are hitting a lot. Why can't you do it now? Why can't you do it now? Why can't you do it now? And I think that some response has to be made.
Yeah, I hear you. It just, they would say, and this works on people, well, we do just want to go back to what we had under Trump. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, no, well, Trump did everything great, so we want that. Yeah, I struggle with, but I guess those people you're not going to reach. I don't know. The thing that drives me crazy is all these points about the economic numbers. Show me one single credible prediction or forecast as we were exiting the pandemic that said by any of the metrics you're talking about, we were expected, it was at all realistic for us to come out of that better than we did. We did better than our predictions. If you look at GDP, CBO, the Congressional Budget Office projections, you had our GDP growth before we knew there was going to be a pandemic, currently now being our GDP less than it is now. So before we knew we were going to collapse, we thought we weren't going to be doing as well in the most generic economic metric than we're currently doing. Inflation came down faster than every other country because it was a global crisis, but we dealt with it better. I understand these pains are so real. I just don't know why no one engages with that and then find me some other country that handled it better. Because don't you have to cite some example of what you're talking about, because Trump wasn't handling it better. He was messing everything up. And we do have studies to bolster that about the public health exacerbation of his policies during the pandemic. So I know we've gone through that a gazillion times on both of our shows, but it's going to be really enraging if people just not grappling with those facts and choosing it. Honestly, a more simple analysis, which is, well, these people were in office there, that person was in office there, even though that person was in office when it was at its worst, but we're just going to forget that part of his stint. If that creates a situation where Trump can be elected, my hope is enough people understand what we're talking about that wouldn't happen, because it sounds like they have focus grouped and pulled that phrase of why haven't you done it, and let's go back to Trump sort of deal, and it's effective enough for them to repeat it over and over, as absurd as I find it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that so much of this is reductive, and there's probably a better way to do it. And if you are going to do it, they need to cite their sources. They don't cite their sources, and it is maddening because, well, you know what it comes down to? It's that whole fiscal conservatism thing. You associate the Republican Party with fiscal conservatism. Right. Fiscal conservatism sounds really good, and so you're inclined to give the Republicans the benefit of the doubt. But 10 out of the last 11 recessions began under Republican presidents. Modern American history has been a Democrat coming in and cleaning up the mess left for him or her by a Republican president. And it's maddening. And then you combine all of that with the curve on which that Donald Trump is perpetually graded, and it makes this election incredibly competitive, even though it shouldn't. It shouldn't be based on character and quality of who Donald Trump is: a pathological liar, a malignant narcissist, an authoritarian, an adjudicated rapist, a convicted felon, an insurrectionist. And it really shouldn't be on the merits either. Again, he said he would repeal and replace Obamacare. He failed. And by the way, JD Vance, if you're watching, like and subscribe both to Luke and I know you're watching. Trump trying and failing to repeal and replace Obamacare, he doesn't get credit for that. Well, the Obamacare survived the Trump years. Yeah, because he failed to kill it, because he's so stupid. It was a terrible motivation.
I was wondering what the Trump saved Obamacare. Do they mean Trump saved it from himself because he failed to repeal it?
Yeah, it's like no, Luke, you don't understand. It's like how an attempted murderer saves you by failing to kill you. You know what I'm saying? It's the dumbest thing. And this is where, with all due respect to Governor Walz, a more rhetorically, like a Pete Buttigieg or Governor Gavin Newsom would have pounced on those moments, and been like, wait, he saved it from himself, or he saved it by trying and failing to kill it, or he would have used my attempted murder, metaphor there. Or even the part where there are current laws and regulations protecting people with preconditions. Why, JD? Who brought those protections and regulations? It was Democrats. You all tried to kill it.
I know. That drove me crazy. So the big recap, I know you got to go. Josiah's a booked man. So we'll wrap it up soon. But my overall thing is on the facts that were espoused and the substance and the arguments that were made. JD Vance said all the stuff we expected him to say. Yes, he's rhetorically effective at delivering those things, but didn't bring any hot moments that are going to break the internet and help the campaign at all. That's about as well as I'd expect it going. And Tim Walz delivered, given that he's not a debate master, a perfectly effective debate performance, making the generic points, not being caught in any corner other than the China-related thing that's going to be I don't think people care about that would be too disastrous. And I think he made some really strong points. I think the one soundbite that I'm thinking of is probably, other than the school shooter moment, just because if he circulated, I've befriended a mass shooter. I think the January 6th moment, which is good. That's circulating, but other points are like, yeah, Vance had some things he would do rapid fire that MAGA media will be playing, but it's not the same as the Harris moments that would actually make an impact in the election. And I think that Walz did perfectly fine, and Vance did about as I'd expect. And this is not going to move the needle, but it did introduce a lot of people to these two candidates for the first time, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I doubt it will move the needle. I don't know who won. I would say, obviously, overall in delivery, there's no question that Vance was the more polished performer, and I just have to acknowledge that. Who won? Again, I think that Walz was better on the facts. Walz was better with passion on topics over which he cared, and he dealt a brutal blow to Vance there at the end on that January 6th question. So I'm going to really have to digest who won. the debate. I will be interested to see what this does for J.D. Vance's favorability ratings. I don't think we're going to see massive change. I don't think it's like Governor Walz will drop and J.D. Vance will skyrocket, but I wonder if it will close the gap somewhat between them. And yeah, I'll have more fully fleshed thoughts out tomorrow. But Luke, first and foremost, I love doing this with you, buddy. It was a lot of fun. even the moments where I was like, again, like some of the gaffes. But yeah, I'm still pretty confident about this election. But it was fun doing this debate coverage with you. And it's sad that this is probably the last debate coverage we'll get to do because Trump keeps running away from the vice president.
Till the next election cycle, we'll still be here. And I appreciate you, Josiah. The last closing thought I have is that's a good point that I'm over because I'm like over stressing about it, over analyzing. Oh, well, if I think about style points and this and that, but your average viewer is also adjusting for, okay, Waltz clearly is not as much of a debater, but I hear the points he's making. I feel like he's a more honest guy. Those judgments are also being made. That's why the whole, unless you have a Vice President Harris versus Trump debate or a Biden versus Trump debate, where in opposite directions, there's a clear, monumental shift towards one person because of the debate. This whole like who won thing is really difficult for me because it's who won on the truth or on the delivery of certain lines. So I agree that's kind of slightly difficult for me to answer. But Josiah, you are a gentleman and a scholar, and we'll be doing something else, if not a debate, very soon together. Everyone go to subscribe to Pondering Politics on YouTube. Luke Beasley
and subscribe to Luke Beasley too. I want to give a shout out. Again, if you're watching on my channel, please be sure to like and subscribe. We got to get this guy to 1 million subscribers.
That's right. We're getting so close. I could taste it.
Taste it. Just taste it. Right out there in front of you.
Y'all have a wonderful night. We'll see you on our respective shows tomorrow.